Hello, I'm Donald Leggett, and welcome to focusIR's Stocks to Watch for 2024. It's been a year of outperformance for Utilico Emerging Markets Trust, the investment trust with a stock portfolio focused on emerging markets. UEM specialises in defensive holdings, which reflect the team's belief in long-term growth in countries such as Brazil, India, China, and Vietnam. Charles Jillings, CEO, and his senior team explain all.
Has been a real sell down of equities globally as people have sought out cash to meet mortgage payments, to help families, to help their businesses. And that downdraft, if you want, on the equity markets has seen the retail investor, if you want, step to the sidelines in places like Vietnam, step to the sidelines in Brazil. So valuations are low. And if you looked at most metrics, valuations are 15 to 20% below where the long-term trend is. So I would think as investors step back into equities, we should see that valuation uplift. And as interest rates drop, clearly balance sheets of corporates and the cost of debt for them starts to trend down again. So those two things, I think, are real tailwinds as a result of interest rate policy. If you looked at the emerging market central banks, while they were probably quicker to move to increase their interest rates to get ahead of inflation, which was running much higher than in the developed markets, the reality is that they haven't then reduced the interest rates as their inflation rates have dropped. So you're seeing real interest rates at all-time highs. I think Brazil's real interest rate today is 7%. And all that tells me is there's room for the central banks in the emerging markets to reduce their interest rates. And we all know that when that happens, economies become energized, and also investors will switch away from fixed income, where I think they've been focused for the last 12 months, and rightly so. They've been very attractive returns. I think the next 12 months is going to be different, but certainly inflation has rolled over, and in many markets is now at a level where interest rates should follow downwards. Emerging markets, I think a simple answer is they have strong GDP growth. If you looked at China, 1.4 billion people, it's growing over 6.5%. If you looked at Vietnam, 100 million people, it's growing at around 4.5%. And so it goes on. So most of the emerging markets themselves have strong GDP growth. And how are they achieving that? They are unlocking the potential in their markets through a number of factors. One is a clear vision from government as to what they're trying to achieve. So if you looked at India and the Modi government, they're crystal clear on what they're trying to achieve in terms of the infrastructure and the investment in, if you want, education. So most emerging markets are focused on the enabling their economies to compete globally, and that means education and that means infrastructure. Those combinations with strong GDP growth make it a good place to go as an investor. I think China itself is interesting. I've just been there for nearly just over a week. And my observation would be that there are headwinds in terms of the property overhang, but I have no doubt they will work their way through them. I don't think it's fatal. I think it's indigestion, if you want. But if I look at the new economy in terms of electric vehicles, EV, and renewables, they have invested very heavily into their capability, and they're certainly leading the world in terms of cost of production for all of that. And I think that growth will stand them in good stead over the next 2 to 3 years. So I'm optimistic that they can achieve a 5% growth rate next year.
So utilities make great investments because they typically operate in strong regulatory regimes. So you can be confident that if you invest the capital, you can make the return because there's a regulatory regime. And across most emerging markets, you have very well developed regulatory regimes that support this. And if you look at the utilities across emerging markets, a lot of investment still needs to go into these countries. So if you take, for example, transmission grids, you have this investment in renewables that requires a lot of transmission to extract the electricity and deliver it to the consumption bases. And so there's a lot of different areas which do require investment. People are using more energy. And so we like the investment environment provided by strong regulatory regimes.
It's interesting because across UEM we have a broad spectrum of development in the digital space. For example, in South Korea, we're invested in a data center company, and in South Korea the speeds are sort of off the scale compared to what we'd have, say, in the UK. At the same time, in rural Africa, people are connecting to the internet for the first time, and we have some small holdings there in telecoms and mobile tower companies. What is interesting is that internet connectivity is becoming increasingly essential wherever you are in the world. But the level of service that you get will obviously depend on the affordability of the handsets, of the equipment, etc., to make it economic, I suppose, for companies to provide services. But there's opportunities at every level of the spectrum to drive returns and find growth.
I really like about infrastructure and the transportation sector is it's really tangible. You can see it, you can touch it, and you can really clearly see the impact of what good investment or good investment in infrastructure has on the quality of people's everyday lives. And why do those investments are so good within emerging markets? Well, as we see the expansion of GDP per capita within the emerging markets, the growth of the middle class, demand for infrastructure grows. And if I take that back to basics, I mean, if you look at sort of the individuals within sort of countries that are not so wealthy, then demand for everyday basics such as food and essential services such as clean running water, sanitation, gas and electricity are all there. And that all requires infrastructure investments.